It's often the case that we think of institutions as having always been there, that no one really created them. It's natural, perhaps, to lose sight of the fact that desires and decisions of individuals over a century ago created the path that leads directly to our door. How would one go about establishing a college? What would be in the minds of those who had the determination even to try? Who were these people who wanted this so passionately, and why did they? Who were they who came through its doors all those years ago to study and to teach? Where did they come from, and what did they hope for? Which of the college's graduates inspired the students in the hundreds of one-room schoolhouses across New England? Which of the youngsters took up the torch of learning and the challenges of teaching? Which alumni, students, faculty, and staff interrupted their lives to serve their country in times of war? Who of them returned to continue to serve their nation in its classrooms? Who never returned? Who went on to professions other than teaching? Who entered public service? Who remained in New Hampshire and who went off to foreign lands? Can we ever know the impact that our graduates have made in the thousands of lives that they have touched? At the turn of the 20th century, with the progressive movement in full swing, the desire to equalize opportunities for American citizens was manifesting itself in a multitude of ways. The passage of child labor laws, together with mandatory education requirements, placed thousands of young people in need of public schools. There had always been a long tradition of outstanding educational academies in Cheshire County and in Keene, reaching back to Catherine Fiske's Young Ladies' Seminary, founded in 1811, the second oldest such establishment in the United States. As early as 1845, the New Hampshire Sentinel reported on its front page of May 7th the positive results of the new pedagogical methods applied to teacher training in a summer teachers' institute, as well as the Common School Convention held in the meeting house in the neighboring town of Swansea. These community-supported teachers' institutes were the forerunners of the normal schools. Henry Clinton Morrison, educational philosopher, author of numerous books on education, and the true founder of Keene Normal School, was the state superintendent of public instruction from 1904 to 1917. A good example of an early 20th century progressive, Morrison stated,
"There can be no permanent abolishment of special privileges, except we begin at the bottom by providing equal opportunity in the education of the child."
Morrison said that 1 teacher in 3 had been improperly trained, and that 1 in 5 was utterly incompetent. It was clear to Morrison and others that the establishment of norms was essential, and the normal school was the solution. The normal school in Plymouth, which had been established in 1871, was not training sufficient numbers of teachers for New Hampshire. The state needed another normal school. Morrison made known his desire to have a New Hampshire community fill this need. Two Keene Democrats, Charles Gale Shedd and Joseph Madden, went into action. On February 10, 1907, the city of Keene held a public debate on the issue. Some in the audience suggested that the presence of a normal school in Keene would raise the cultural level of the community. Others, more practical-minded, embraced the idea that the presence of the normal school would supply the city with a virtually endless stream of free student teachers, thus lowering the tax burden. The resolution to invite the State Education Committee to Keene, with an eye toward considering the city as the site of the next state normal school, was passed by the citizens of Keene without a dissenting vote. It was the responsibility of the host community to supply land, funds, or buildings. The people of Keene raised $19,000 to purchase the Hale and Fisk properties to give to the state, close to $500,000 in today's currency. These buildings, considered by many as among the most beautiful in the city, were a powerful enticement by any measure. On April 8, 1909, the establishment of a state normal school in Keene was approved by the state legislature. Just 4 months later, the school was completely functional and staffed. It is a feat that astonishes even today. Morrison contacted one of the leaders of the progressive movement in education, Jeremiah Rhodes of Kansas, to be the new normal school's first principal, and gave him free rein in hiring. Rhodes selected a faculty comprised of men and women of unusually high qualifications, at a time when normal schools would often hire faculty without even high school diplomas. This reflected his belief, one that he shared with Morrison, that future teachers needed to receive instruction in the disciplines of the humanities and sciences, in addition to educational pedagogy. On September 28, 1909, at the opening ceremonies of Keene Normal School, addressing the assembled 27 students, all women, and 100 prominent guests, a much-moved Henry Morrison stated,
"We do not seek to make a large, unwieldy institution, but with God's help, we hope to build up here the best school for the purpose for which it is intended."
5 students graduated in June of 1910 from a one-year program for teachers who needed more training. The first full class graduated the next year. These first alumni chose the school's colors, white and red, perhaps the first, but certainly not the last, of enduring contributions made to the institution by its graduates. Discontented with what he perceived as a lack of state support, Jeremiah Rhodes left with the class of 1911. Morrison was to depart 6 years later. Instead of the state normal school that the legislature had envisioned and commissioned, Morrison and Rhodes had created a People's College. The next principal, Wallace E. Mason, was to bring the institution more in line with the intent of the original mandate from the state for a traditional normal school. Leading the institution for 28 years, the longest term of any president at Keene, Daddy Mason, as he was known by virtually everyone, brought the school through the First World War, the Flapper era, the Great Depression, to the brink of the next war, and the school's transformation to a 4-year teachers' college. Mason was loved by the students, most of whom responded favorably to his paternalistic nature. A strict moralist, he also believed in a practical work ethic. For Mason, character was more important than scholarship.
Before employing teachers for my institution, I asked them, what is your relation to the church life of your community, and how do you spend your Sabbath? Wallace E. Mason.
Keene Normal School was not officially a school for women only. That the school had virtually all female students for many years of its existence was a function of social forces and the marketplace. The elementary schools looked to hire single young women, and rarely married women.
There wasn't any rule against the admission of boys, but since we were prepared to teach only elementary subjects, there were very few boys in those days that were interested.
In these early years, virtually all the students were women from communities in northern New England, from rural villages and farms, whose lives had been narrowly circumscribed.
I realized how very immature we were at 18 years old, or 17 years old, and this happened to be when we came to normal school, from what the young people are today. Our pleasures were much more simple, and life entirely was more simple. When we came here, most of us had come from smaller places, although a few came from Manchester and Nashua, and it was a big deal to be living in a larger town.
Well, my home was in Plainfield, New Hampshire, and I had learned about Keene Normal School and arrived there in 1914. My father took me to the station in Windsor with a horse and wagon. I went by train from Windsor, Vermont, changing cars at Bellows Falls.
That was the general theme in my day, that we were the first in the family to go to college. Most families. Our group was all the first time that they'd gone to college.
Some of the students were children of immigrants who spoke little or no English.
We talked Swedish exclusively at home, my father and mother and I. And I did not know how to speak English when I went to school.
I was born in Germany, and I came over with my parents when I was about 3 years old in 1926. But we spoke German at home.
The passion of these young women to advance their education was part of the fabric of many of their families.
My mother wasn't well, so she would have me in bed with her a lot of times. Taught me to read. I don't know when I learned to read, because I learned to read in bed with her.
My mother was a reader. I can have a picture of her stirring, reading with a book in one hand.
And my mother, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with her and our primers, our first grade primers, learning to read. So she also wanted to read, and she also wanted her citizenship papers, which, you know, she got just as soon as possible. Yeah, they somehow got it across that we needed more than just a high school education, even though we were girls, and probably would get married, you know.
While these young women may have arrived with a lack of sophistication, one thing they did not lack was the burning desire to become public school teachers.
I went to the country school. We had all 8 grades in one room. Probably there were 20 of us, I don't know. Mabel Perry had gone to school and learned how to teach. The other teachers came right from high school and were our teachers. And I made up my mind then, when I was a little girl, that I was going to be a teacher, and I was going to teach every day. I was going to teach, because Mabel Perry did.
To them, Keene represented the epitome of sophistication and access. Many students had never been to a restaurant, a movie, a concert or play except in high school. Until the early 1920s, many would have not even had the opportunity to listen to radio.
I just got out and saw the world. I mean, there was some other place beside the farm. Because I'd never been anywhere on my own. Never went to the movies. I remember we went to church because I wasn't acquainted with Catholics when I went to church, when I went at home. So when I got to Keene, 3 of the girls in where we lived there at Janelle's were Catholics. And we'd walk up street and they'd have to go into the church. And we'd say, well, what have they done wrong that they had to go to church? And they have to go to church every Sunday, so we better go to church every Sunday. So we used to go up to the head of the square to that Congregational church and went to church there.
They would not allow us to go home with any fellow or anything at that time. They did not allow us out at night. They did not allow us anything. But we sneaked out and learned to smoke.
The campus consisted of the original Hale and Fisk properties, a greenhouse, sunken garden, some outbuildings, and a tennis court. There were no dormitories till 1914, when Fisk Hall was built. The facility was named for the storied founder of the School for Women. Fisk Dormitory was to have a profound effect on the students. The young women now had not only a home, but also a center for social bonding and intellectual growth. Soon, Fisk Hall formed the core of the college experience. Friendships, traditions, clubs, school publications, sports events, outings, parties. These forged bonds for these young women, which lasted throughout their lives.
Oh, yes, it was a wonderful experience. Definitely. I mean, Keene was wonderful. It was a good school.
Well, I think it was a happy time. It was, you know, as you walk by, it was hi and hello and so forth. No, I liked it there. I really did.
As teachers were considered to be representatives of a certain way of life, and for them to be respected by the communities in which they were to teach, they needed to have acquired a set of manners and social customs which were reflective of the importance of their position. Miss Mabel Brown's duties were teaching classes in manners, etiquette, and social graces, from demonstrating how to pour tea to how a lady was to behave in public, right down to the proper way for a lady to cross her legs.
We were told, for one thing, that it would be nice if when we went out to teach for the first time, that we not date any boys until at least Christmas time. It wouldn't look right to immediately date any boy in the place where we were teaching.
Mason would tolerate no unseemly behavior from his students. As a result, in the residence homes on or near the campus, Blake House, Appleton House, Penelope House, Bruder House, 176 Main Street, and many others, relationships with the neighbors were positive. Mrs. Boscia lived across the street from the young women of Bruder House.
Across the street was a stucco house, and there was girls living there. And I told them that anytime they needed a rake or whatever, they could come over and borrow it. They were wonderful. You know, the next day, they brought me flowers.
Daddy Mason's moral sense was felt in every aspect of the students' lives. He insisted that the female students wear black stockings and bloomers. He also expected that they would be present at daily chapel.
If we wanted to go out in the evening, we could go if we signed a paper, and we had to be back at 10 o'clock and be crossed off the list.
And we had for Jim, we had these little jumpers that we wore. It was an all one piece, And it didn't have any sleeves, but it would button right up to the neck. And it had like bloomer pants, elastic around here, and black stockings that came up under the elastic, and then that held them together. And you were never to let bare skin show between the top of the stocking and the bottom of the rump. Oh my God, he was so strict. If you were at a dance, dancing, and if the boy put his hand around you, he had to keep it up at waist high. And if he didn't, Daddy Mason would come right down on the floor and he'd take his hand and he'd put it up there. That's the truth.
They were very protective of us, you know. Miss Essen would have us there and warn us about getting into the torrid zone.
She almost kicked me out of school my last year there because I went up and modeled for a fellow. He had come into the art, and he was in the sophomore year, and he had a great big canvas he was painting on, and he asked us, and I said, sure, I'll do it. Well, I put on my bathing suit, which is not skinny like they are now, and I put my dress and stuff on, and then I put my outside clothes on and started to go when Miss Baird came in. And boy, she was fit to be tied. She says, boy, you're going to get boosted from here in no time flat. And I said, I started crying because I said, I can't do that because my mother and father, they don't have money and stuff, and they were putting me through college. I said, I can't do that. Well, anyway, she didn't do anything more, so I graduated that year, right.
As the girls would go out on their dates, this is a day of girls, she would pinch the girls on the rear end to be sure they had their girdle on, because that was supposed to keep them from, you know what.
Early in his presidency, Mason invited women's rights advocate and social reformer Margaret Sanger to speak on campus. In her address, Sanger told her audience that it was time for women to enter to learn and go forth to serve. Mason made this quote the school's motto. He would have these words painted on the wall to the left side of the proscenium arch of the Parker Hall Auditorium with his own signature statement, "If you do this, you can't do that," on the right side. The combination of Sanger's commitment to moral civic engagement and Mason's clear-eyed Yankee pragmatism, the hallmark of his administration. The complete union of practical classroom experience and educational theory in the Keene Normal School curriculum was drawing national attention. Florence Wheeler was to say in recollection,
A Keene girl could get a job anywhere. They were clamoring for us all over everywhere because the Keene girls were well-trained, well-prepared, well-trained.
The modest yearly tuition at Keene was even waived should the student agree to teach in the state upon graduation.
In 1926, Keene Normal initiated a 4-year degree program, organized itself into academic departments, and had become, in effect, a true college. President Mason oversaw a building campaign that was to create what would become the heart of the campus for decades. Butterfield, Huntress, the expansion of Blake House, and the addition to Fisk would actually be a building boom which would not be equaled until the 1960s. However, certainly Mason's greatest coup was convincing the governor, Huntley Spaulding, to self-finance the new gymnasium, with the additional gift of the first indoor swimming pool in the region. Spaulding would be the first in a line of benefactors who have played a significant role in the growth of the institution. As the school developed into a residential campus, the students organized a dizzying variety of clubs and sports teams. There were more student organizations during the 1920s than the campus would see for over half a century. There was a glee club, and even a banjo-mandolin club, the precursor of the renowned Keene State Guitar Orchestra that in later years would travel around the world and continues to perform before enthusiastic audiences. For a time, there was even the Clergyman's Daughters Club. The women of the Rifle Club competed against teams from across the United States, while the students also staged an on-campus production of Andromeda, with all dialogue and songs in Latin. The students began the publication of the Chronicle, the first regular student publication. A quarterly, it presented an array of articles, literary and artistic endeavors, to include the first school song and, in 1922, the first representation of the owl, which would become the school's official mascot. Club teams grew into varsity athletics. Other clubs, such as the Keene Normal Dramatic Club, were integrated into the curriculum and would actually become academic departments decades later. Much as many initiatives started by individual students and faculty were to grow into programs, centers, and festivals for which the institution has been justly proud. The first male student had arrived in 1915, Harlan Goodwin, from Claremont, New Hampshire. For reasons unknown, Harlan left for Christmas break and never returned. The first two male students to enroll and remain at the school through graduation were Sheldon Barker and Albert Brooks, who in 1921 became the first male graduates of Keene Normal School. Mason was determined to increase the number of male students. He had a photo taken of the first 5 male students in one class, who were then pressed into service as the Keene Normal School's men's basketball team. He even announced the establishment of a football team. By the mid-1920s, Mason had introduced the industrial arts program into the curriculum. However, there were still very few male students at KNS.
Well, at that time, the boys was just coming, there weren't many fellows there. I think there were, as I remember it, there was just one, up in the corner, there was one big table full of boys. And we'd take a basket of rolls and up to the table, and of course they'd throw them to each other and give us the empty basket. We had to go back down and get some more rolls. So that kind of upset our plans a bit. The only time when Miss Brown sat with them, they didn't do that, because she was the manners teacher. So years later, I found out that my husband-to-be was one of those guys.
On February 1st, 1927, at Daly Chapel, a jubilant Mason celebrated the arrival of the 50th male at Keene Normal School. His efforts had finally achieved, in his words, the noble half-hundred. In 1929, Mason, whose title had changed from principal to president 2 years earlier, hired the famous marathon runner Clarence DeMar to teach in the print shop. DeMar was by then the 6-time winner of the Boston Marathon. He would go on to win a record-setting 7th marathon the following year, and was, beyond a doubt, the most famous faculty member at KNS.
And the whole school marched uptown to the railroad station, and we put him on the train, and he got on the express car. He wouldn't sit in the passenger with the seats. He jumped up into the express car, and we sang and cheered and waved flags and everything, had a grand old time sending him off to Boston.
By 1933, there were 40 men in the graduating class. By 1938, Mason had managed to raise the percentage of men at the normal school to 1/3. However, the Second World War was to drastically alter that ratio. From the beginning of his tenure, Wallace Mason actively attempted to connect his students with the wider world by bringing a range of noted speakers and artists to campus.
Amelia Earhart came over and visited us in Keene. She was on stage.
In 1937, under the auspices of the Roosevelt administration's Works Progress Administration, Mason invited Gladys Brannigan, noted painter and muralist from Massachusetts, to paint a mural around the proscenium arch of Normal Hall, the Parker Hall Auditorium. The mural represented the Native American attack on Blake House in the early 1700s on one side, and the New Hampshire forces riding off to fight in the Revolutionary War on the other. In 1939, Wallace Mason, nearing his 70s, retired. On May 31st, 1939, the school officially became Keene Teachers College.